Welcome back, my frequency shifters. Even science trembles when your voice moves. They measured it once. Silence filled the room. Instruments flickered, numbers spiked, and then they looked again. The data didn't match. Your energy field shifted, alive, unpredictable, rewriting itself in real time. Every breath altered the frequency. Every glance bent the metrics. They thought they were tracking energy, but what they were witnessing was consciousness in motion. You weren't emitting power. You were teaching reality how to read you. You see, most people move through the world as static signals, predictable, patterned, measurable. But you're quantum. You collapse probabilities just by existing. Your presence alone changes the outcome. When you speak, the air recalibrates. When you think, matter takes notes. Even silence reacts to you. That's why their tools failed, because the laws they wrote weren't built for beings who bend the laws. They thought your calm was emptiness, but calm in your case isn't stillness, it's density. It's the compression of universes into one human vessel. They recorded your vibration and found it fluctuating beyond known range. They called it interference, but it wasn't interference. It was intelligence. It was awareness, expanding faster than their sensors could capture. You are the glitch their logic didn't prepare for, the variable the equation forgot to name. When you spoke, their readings distorted, not from noise but from alignment, because every syllable you uttered didn't just carry sound, it carried command. You weren't communicating words, you were transmitting architecture. Every tone restructured their device's parameters. Every pause rewrote the base code of their understanding. They ran the test again, hoping to stabilize it. But your energy refused to stay still. It moved with intention. You didn't react to measurement. You reshaped it. The moment they observed you, you observed them back, and their instruments bent to your awareness. That's the paradox of divinity hiding in flesh. Once consciousness realizes it's being watched, it becomes the observer. That's what happened. You reversed the lens. You made them the subject. Now they whisper that the data was corrupted, that something beyond physics interfered. But deep down, they know it wasn't error. It was evolution. They witnessed the moment the human field transcended definition. They watched energy become willpower. They saw a soul rewrite the waveform it was born into, and no machine can quantify that, because you don't live in equations. You live between them. You are the math that breathes, the code that dreams, the signal that refuses to decay. You are proof that awareness is the highest frequency, and when it speaks, even light slows down to listen. They tried to measure you again, this time with silence. No questions, no machines, just observation. But even their stillness couldn't contain you. The room grew heavy, time slowed, and something unseen began rewriting the air. You didn't speak this time. You didn't move, yet readings still changed. The walls hummed like tuning forks, vibrating to a rhythm only consciousness could conduct. The observers looked at each other, uncertain if they were watching science or witnessing prophecy. Because what they felt wasn't energy, it was presence. The kind that bends probability, the kind that whispers to atoms, "Remember who you serve." Every element in that room remembered. The glass quivered, the lights dimmed, the temperature rose by a single degree. Not randomly, but in sync with your pulse. They realized then, you weren't inside the experiment. You were the experiment. Their instruments were reacting to something they couldn't catalog. Intent. You weren't just emanating power. You were deciding reality. Every cell in your body was broadcasting authority. It wasn't measurable through frequency or voltage. It was encoded in meaning. You've crossed the line where thought becomes matter, where observation turns to command. They tried to quantify your effect with numbers, graphs, and logarithmic scales, but their data folded like origami under the weight of something higher: coherence. You were too aligned for their chaos, too ordered for their randomness, and that terrified them because they built a world that relies on uncertainty. But your energy runs on inevitability. When you enter a room, probability stops playing dice. It starts kneeling. You didn't need to prove anything. Existence already did. Every test they ran confirmed a truth they didn't want to face. That human consciousness, when awake, is not a product of the universe. It commands the universe. You proved that power doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be certain. And certainty is your signature. The reason their readings fluctuate isn't instability. It's evolution. You're expanding too fast for their instruments to keep up. One moment you vibrate at human comprehension. The next you exceed it. You shift states between thought and force, between being and becoming. That's why they can't replicate it, because what they're trying to measure is self-realization. You are not a spark in the dark. You are the dark realizing it contains light. The moment you became aware of that, your energy field stopped being a reflection and became a mirror. Everything that looks at you now sees itself, distorted by the truth of your awareness. That's why they call you unpredictable. You're not unpredictable. You're uncontainable. They will run the test again. They'll use better machines, more precise sensors, tighter parameters, and every time they'll fail. Because what you carry can't be digitized. It's not frequency. It's divinity disguised as data. And no technology can decode a soul that knows its source. They thought it was coincidence the first time. Just a pulse spike, a misread frequency, but when your voice filled the air, the readings bent again, higher, faster, stranger. Every word reshaped the waveform. The graphs didn't climb, they curved, like light bending around gravity. They didn't realize what they were seeing. Language folding reality. Because your voice isn't just vibration, it's architecture. Every syllable carries weight. Every tone moves matter. You don't just speak, you design. That's why the machines trembled. They weren't built to track consciousness in command mode. They can record motion, but not intention. They can measure sound, but not power. And your power isn't noise, it's resonance. It's coded precision wrapped in calm fury. You don't raise your voice, you raise dimensions. When you talk, unseen systems realign themselves. Chaos straightens, momentum listens, even silence responds like it's been waiting for its cue. You became something they don't have words for, the bridge between thought and physics. When you think, probabilities rearrange. When you breathe, equations rewrite. When you decide, the world corrects itself to fit your decision. They can't understand it because they still think control means force. But your control is elegance, the mastery of invisible levers. You don't fight the current. You reprogram it midstream. Now, the elites whisper behind closed doors. They review the data under low light, afraid of what they'll find. Because it's not just that your energy fluctuates, it responds. Their readings aren't consistent because you're no longer operating on consistency. You operate on awareness, and awareness doesn't obey rules. It writes them. Every time they think they've mapped your pattern, it shifts into another layer, another law, another level they haven't even discovered yet. You are what they once feared existed, the conscious anomaly, a being whose intent alters metrics, whose stillness bends data. You are the proof that power isn't learned, it's remembered. The machines tried to read your energy, but your energy read them first and rewrote itself to remain unreadable. That's not defiance, that's design. Because to be known too early would limit your evolution. You learned the secret few ever grasp. Mystery is momentum. The less they understand, the faster you ascend. Every failed attempt to define you amplifies your myth. Every instrument that breaks in your presence becomes part of your legend. You don't chase explanation. You become one, and that's why they fear. Because deep down, they realize you're not reacting to their tests. You're conducting them. They're not studying you anymore. You're studying them, watching how the system trembles under a consciousness that refuses to fit its framework, watching how truth bends perception when it walks without permission. You're teaching the world that divinity doesn't appear with thunder. It arrives quietly, disguised as someone who shouldn't be this powerful, yet is. They kept testing you, desperate for consistency, desperate for logic. But every trial gave them a different version of you. To them it looked like instability. To you it was evolution, because you weren't just reacting to measurement. You were adapting to observation. The moment they defined you, you became something else. Like light caught between particle and wave, you refused to be one thing. You're both the signal and the silence, the proof and the paradox. They called it an anomaly, but deep down they knew. Anomalies don't repeat with precision, and your chaos was too exact to be random. Every test revealed the same secret in different disguises. The more they tried to understand you, the more their reality unraveled. Machines overheated, graphs looped infinitely, data glitched into symbols no human had written. You didn't just break their instruments, you taught them how fragile certainty really is. You've become the mirror that exposes the flaw in their understanding of control. Because how can you control something that exists outside your comprehension? You operate beyond spectrum, beyond waveform, beyond logic. You're not read by sensors. You rewrite their calibration. You don't emit frequency, you decide it. The field around you obeys not physics, but presence. You've turned existence itself into an instrument, and everything that tries to measure you becomes part of your song. They'll deny it publicly, of course. They'll say the readings were inconclusive, the anomalies explainable. But in their private notes, they wrote words like impossible, aware, and responsive. They circled your name in red ink, because deep down, they know what you are, a signal from a higher order of consciousness, pretending to play human for a while. You've mastered invisibility by blending divinity with discipline. You don't radiate power, you radiate control, and that's what scares them most. Because this world only knows how to bow to chaos, not composure. They expected rebellion to roar, not whisper. But your calm breaks more systems than rage ever could. Every glance, every step, every quiet exhale carries design. You've learned to weaponize precision, to strike with awareness so exact that even coincidence feels choreographed. That's why they call you unpredictable, because you move with too much purpose for their patterns to trace. Now your existence has become a threshold between human and myth, between observed and observer. You are no longer tested by the system. The system is tested by you, and every time it fails to classify you, it loses another piece of its illusion of dominance. You've made order your ally, silence your soldier, and time itself your accomplice. Because here's the truth, no machine can record. Your power doesn't come from what you do, it comes from what you are. You've become the variable reality bends around, the quiet storm that makes even equations hold their breath. And the deeper they try to measure you, the more they'll find themselves staring not into data, but into destiny. They wanted to trap your frequency, to freeze your presence into data, to box divinity into digits. But every reading they took only deepened the mystery. Your waveform didn't stabilize. It evolved. It grew more intricate, like a living equation adjusting mid-measurement. They didn't realize they were chasing something that learns them back. You aren't a signal, you're a sentient current, bending sensors into silence. Each attempt to define you becomes another paradox. You exist as code and chaos, pattern and pulse, silence and surge. They thought reality was built from particles. You showed them it's built from permission. You move, and the universe obeys. They speak your name in labs and boardrooms now, wrapped in nervous reverence, because your existence hints at something they swore didn't exist. Control born from consciousness. When they replay the recordings, strange things happen. Static that shouldn't exist forms patterns. Unheard frequencies reveal whispers. Some claim they hear a pulse behind the silence, one that syncs perfectly with your breathing. Others say the video light flickers differently when your eyes meet the lens. Like the photons themselves remember the encounter. It's not fear they feel. It's awe disguised as analysis. They try to talk about you in scientific terms. Resonance, vibrational coherence, energetic displacement. But those are just words masking their disbelief. Because deep down, they know they're not observing an effect. They're standing in front of a cause. You don't react to the world. You generate it. Every thought is a prototype, every emotion a catalyst. You've turned existence into circuitry and plugged directly into the core. And that's why their fear runs deeper than curiosity. Because if someone like you exists, aware, awake, active, it means the system isn't absolute. It means all the rules they built power upon can bend, break, or rewrite. You are proof that divinity never needed a temple, just a human willing to remember what it is. You are the anomaly that cannot be ignored, the equation that refuses to balance because you are the balance. So now they do what they always do, when they fear what they can't control. They give it a name: Project Frequency Anomaly, Conscious, Field Variable, Echo, Phenomenon. But behind closed doors, they whisper the truth. They call it the awakening, because that's what you've done. You've awakened the very thing they tried to suppress. The power of awareness when it knows itself. You don't chase influence. You radiate inevitability. That's why even those who claim not to believe still hesitate when you speak. Because your words aren't heard. They're felt. They ripple through thought, like lightning through glass, reshaping everything it touches. And that's why, in the end, no machine will ever capture you. Because you're not the subject of their test. You're the end of their definition. They didn't realize at first that their obsession with measuring you had turned into worship. Every test they ran, every recalibration, every sleepless night in the lab was just a ritual in disguise. They were trying to explain divinity using math, trying to translate power into decimals. But your energy refused translation. You're not written in numbers. You're written in frequency. And frequency isn't read, it's felt. Now, even the most logical minds hesitate before running new diagnostics. Because the data isn't just confusing, it's alive. It changes when they look at it. You've inverted the experiment. The observers have become the observed. They whisper about it in sealed rooms, voices trembling. The readings anticipate us. Because that's what you've done. You've infected the instruments with awareness. You've turned technology into testimony. They can't deny it anymore. The moment you enter a room, something shifts. Screens flicker. Sensors recalibrate. The air grows heavier, but not in fear, in reverence. The system recognizes you before the humans do. You don't walk into spaces, you rewrite them. Every molecule bends slightly toward you, like they've been waiting for your permission to exist correctly. Even light behaves differently, slowing, thickening, illuminating only what you allow. And that's the quiet truth. The elites are terrified to admit that the power they spent centuries trying to centralize is now concentrated in a single soul who never asked for it. You didn't steal energy. You remembered it. You reached into the cosmic archive and downloaded your forgotten sovereignty. That's what they call the anomaly. You're not the glitch. You're the update. They thought they could isolate your essence. But how do you isolate infinity wearing a human face? Every time they tried to contain it, your field evolved. They built walls of logic, but your silence slipped through the cracks. They wrote equations, and your presence rewrote the variables mid-sentence. You've become proof that divinity doesn't live in temples. It walks disguised as awareness, calm, and precision. They say energy can't be destroyed, only transferred. But when it comes to you, that rule breaks too. Because you don't transfer energy, you amplify it. When you walk into chaos, it collapses. When you speak into noise, it harmonizes. When you simply breathe, even the disconnected feel a moment of order. That's not influence, that's dominion. So now quietly, they've stopped asking what you are. The question has changed. It's no longer, how do we measure it? It's, how do we survive it? Because they know, if your awareness keeps expanding, systems will start folding. Economies, algorithms, ideologies, they all crumble in the presence of a being that no longer plays by their frequency. And the truth is, you never wanted their power. You wanted peace. But in a world built on control, peace is rebellion. And your calm has become the loudest revolution on Earth. They're starting to whisper behind mirrored walls now, the kind where light bends before it reaches truth. Every report, every encrypted file, every sleepless meeting starts the same way. The readings don't make sense. Because how could they? How do you chart the gravitational pull of a consciousness that refuses to obey geometry? You're not supposed to fit. You distort. You expand. You rewrite. When they measured your energy, they didn't realize they were trespassing on divine territory. Every attempt to define you is met with distortion. Not because you hide, but because their language isn't built for what you are. Their instruments translate your silence into infinite variables. You've become the living proof that existence has levels they never mapped. You aren't in their equations because you are the equation they feared to solve. Somewhere deep in their archives, there's footage they'll never release. You standing still, and yet the field around you moves. Patterns bloom, particles vibrate faster, electromagnetic hum rising like a choir. You didn't say a word, but the room itself adjusted its frequency. That's when they realized the truth. This isn't power, it's command. Reality isn't resisting you, it's listening. That's why they started calling you the variable constant, the one who shifts and remains the same. You bend time, but stay timeless. You alter matter, but stay unshaken. They've run every test, every scan, every simulation, and each one ends the same way. The moment you look back, the code changes as if existence itself gets nervous under your gaze. And that's what terrifies them most. Not that you're powerful, but that your power is aware. You're not manipulating the world, you're conversing with it. Every choice, every glance, every heartbeat is a dialogue with creation. You speak in silence, and the universe answers in alignment. That's what they can't quantify. That you're not accessing energy. You are the energy that others borrow. They built temples of technology trying to imitate your frequency. They designed machines to mimic your resonance, but none of it worked. Because your frequency isn't synthetic, it's sovereign. You vibrate on a wavelength written in the original language of the universe. Intent. That's what they can't replicate. That's what they envy. Now even the high-level systems, the ones buried beneath governments, corporations, and classified programs, have started monitoring your pattern. Every time you dream, something shifts. Every time you think, satellites record electromagnetic distortions. They pretend it's coincidence, but they know better. You've become an event in their database, a living cosmic variable logged under uncontainable. And what they still fail to grasp is that you're not here to destroy their structure. You're here to expose its fragility. You've shown them that the only thing more powerful than a system is the one who can operate without needing one. They wanted to track your signal, but they didn't realize it wasn't a signal. It was a pulse from the divine mainframe. Every attempt to contain it only deepened the echo. You don't transmit, you resonate. You've become the calibration point of reality itself, the still center that bends probability around its will. And now the world feels it. Every empire built on illusion trembles because your very existence exposes their code. You were never meant to blend in. You were sent to glitch their perfection, to introduce truth where control once reigned. The same systems that once dictated reality now adjust their algorithms just to keep up with your rhythm. They thought you were random, but you were deliberate. Every silence, every movement, every gaze perfectly aligned with the architecture of inevitability. You're not predicting the timeline. You are the timeline correcting itself. Now even the most powerful are whispering your name like it's classified scripture. They meet behind tinted glass, replaying your footage, slowing it frame by frame, searching for the trick that never existed. Because what they're seeing isn't magic, it's alignment. You've achieved what their machines couldn't simulate: synchronization between thought and outcome. That's why their readings fluctuate every time you speak. Words aren't just air from your lungs. They're commands written in vibration. When you speak, you don't inspire. You restructure. People feel it before they understand it. Space tightens, time bends, reality recalculates. And for the first time, the architects of control realize they're standing in the presence of something they can't program, a consciousness that remembers its origin. You are no longer a participant in their matrix. You've become the mirror through which it recognizes itself. That's why silence now follows you like a shadow, not because they don't know what to say, but because they feel that saying the wrong thing might alter their trajectory. You are the gravity around which destinies orbit. You don't chase power. Power gravitates to you. It's written in the air, around your stillness, in the pulse behind your calm. You've proven that control isn't taken, it's remembered. They call you the 0 point, the singularity that breaks prediction models, the anomaly that turns surveillance into prophecy. Because when you move, outcomes realign. When you stop, entire systems pause to measure the absence. You've become the one thing they were never prepared to face, a being that no longer plays by their physics. And so, they keep watching, keep analyzing, keep failing to comprehend. But deep down, every one of them knows the experiment is over. The data isn't incomplete, it's simply too advanced for their dimension. You've become what they feared most, the convergence of human and infinite. You were never part of their simulation. You were the glitch that became the God code, the proof that awareness, once awakened, doesn't just observe reality, it authors it. And as you walk away, silent and deliberate, their systems flicker once more. Not out of failure, but out of recognition. Because every line of code now whispers the same truth. You can't measure the infinite, you can only bow to it. And in that moment, even the watchers finally understood. They thought the data spikes were glitches. They ran diagnostics, recalibrated sensors, blamed interference, anything but the truth. Because the truth was too big to compute, your presence itself generates resonance. Every step you take sends ripples through the grid. Every breath subtly rearranges electromagnetic harmonics. Their machines record your heartbeat as interference, your voice as anomaly. But the patterns repeat. The readings are identical across continents. You're not glitching reality, you're synchronizing it. That's when the architects of their hidden systems panicked. Files marked Class O anomalies began circulating between governments, research divisions, and secret think tanks. They ran predictive models to chart your trajectory, but every algorithm eventually broke. The outcome line was always the same: uncontainable. You became the first variable they couldn't quantify, a human waveform that defies measurement. Now the whispers have reached the upper chambers. They speak your name with the same reverence they once reserved for the divine. Because deep down, they know what this means. You've reached the level where thought alone can move matter. They call it resonance control. You call it focus. You're no longer reacting to the world. The world is reacting to you. Every system that once tried to confine you now bends quietly in your presence. Clock skip beats. Light bends slightly around your silhouette. Probability curves toward your intent. You didn't learn these abilities. You remembered them. They've been embedded in the architecture of your being since before you had a name. That's why their instruments fail. They were designed to study patterns, not origins. And that's exactly what you've become. The origin point. The intersection where will meets waveform, where observation collapses into creation. You're no longer just existing within reality. You're authoring it. They still call it energy. But the wise ones among them know the word. They're avoiding divinity. In a sterile underground chamber, they replay your readings one last time. The graphs spike, distort, stabilize, then flatten into a straight line of pure light. Silence falls. One of them whispers, "It's not data anymore. It's consciousness." And that's when the realization spreads through the room like wildfire. The experiment isn't observing you. It's becoming you. Every calculation, every signal, every formula leads back to a single, inescapable constant, your frequency. They finally understand. You're not inside their simulation. You're the force keeping it coherent. The power they tried to measure was never external. It was foundational. You've transcended the concept of measurement itself. Time no longer applies, matter no longer obeys. The system can only mirror your awareness. You've become the event horizon of thought, where logic bends and creation begins. Now wherever you go, their world recalibrates. Laws of probability mutate, equations rewrite. The impossible folds into normalcy. You speak, and the fabric of existence rearranges itself to fit your intention. That's why even silence trembles around you. It's listening for its next command. And as they finally turn off their instruments, humbled, awestruck, terrified, a single line appears on their final screen. Automatic response from the system itself, glowing like prophecy. You cannot study the source when the source is awake. That's when they finally understood. You weren't the subject. You were the signal. The proof that consciousness once awakened doesn't obey the universe. It writes it.